So I think we can probably give a start now. So thanks everyone for coming today. Well, my name is Alf Martinez Felipe, and I am the co-champion for the hydrogen economies team in the Center for Energy Transition, and also the lecturer for a discourse on energy conversion and storage in the Masters for Renewable Energies Technologies. And this is actually, I want to welcome everyone today and thank all the people who have been organizing this seminar. I will introduce the speakers in a moment, but I also like to thank my students for letting us this time as well, so we can share this fantastic talk and seminar. So I'm going to let the floor to my colleague, Tavis Potts, who is the director of the Center for Energy Transition. Is leading us, the whole university and the region, towards the next century, well, the already next century. So about changing from oil and gas to obviously a broad range of new technologies. So Tavis, if you would like to please introduce the center, all yours.
Thank you very much, Alf, for that introduction. It's a huge collective effort there, and the CET and the School of Engineering are delighted today to have Dr. Nigel Holmes, the CEO of the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, with us. The CET is one of our 8 core themes, is looking at hydrogen and the hydrogen economy. And looking at this from a whole range of different disciplinary perspectives around hydrogen, from the engineering sides through to the economics, through to the legal and the social aspects. So we're really interested in this sort of transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary collective view about how we achieve energy transition. So we really, if you haven't seen our website yet, please do spin by. It's abdn.ac.uk/energy, where you can see all of our previous seminars. They're all recorded, and you can go through at your leisure and watch some of our fantastic previous and current speakers, and get engaged in the conversation around energy transition as we do this collectively as an institution and as a region pushing forward. So just that short note, thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you very much, Alf, and I really look forward to the seminar this morning.
Thank you, Tavis. So it's my time then to introduce with great pleasure our speaker today. Is someone who is everywhere in the world of fuel cells and hydrogen. Here in Edinburgh, there in Aberdeen, but also in Brussels, you'll find him in every corner when there is a discussion about hydrogen, and he's doing great things for the theme here locally. Right, so Nigel Holmes has been a member of the Scottish Hydrogen Fuel Cells Association since 2005 and became the Chief Executive Officer in April 2011. Over the past 10 years, he has grown the SHFCA membership almost fourfold and has established the association in one of the most proactive hydrogen and fuel cells industry associations in Europe. Actually, myself and the University of Aberdeen are members, so he's done a great job recruiting. Nigel has over 40 years of experience working in low carbon energy generation, supply and use. And his early industry experience was gained with the UK Central Electricity Generating Board and BP Chemicals with technical development and change management. He has been actively involved in hydrogen and fuel cells business and market development since 2005. So Nigel studied chemistry at the Oxford University, followed by a doctorate while working in the CEGB, and completed his MBA with the University of Edinburgh in 2004. He has been actively involved in public-private initiatives, including Scotland's 2020 Climate Group, the Scottish Transport Emissions Partnership, and with policy development, including the recently updated National Transport Strategy for Scotland, and the base hydrogen and fuel cell sector development working group. Well, and apart from this, he's a fantastic speaker, and so he's very keen to come to Aberdeen to show us more about what we're doing. So please, Nigel, without further ado, and thanking you again to come here, the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much for the introduction. That's very comprehensive. This morning, what I'd like to do is just to take you through some of the activities that are happening in Scotland, using slides, just to show you some of the progress that is being made with the development and deployment of hydrogen and fuel cells. But in doing this, I'd like to just take you to certain locations in Scotland where projects are happening, and to give you the examples of what is going on. So if the technology works, I can now share my screen and bring up the slide pack, and we'll go through the slides, and at the end there'll be time for questions. So there's quite a few slides. I'm expecting to take about 25 minutes or so to get through the slides. And this is very much about scaling up hydrogen, but along the way it's a question of learning by doing. So in actually trying to make these projects work as part of an energy system, what are the lessons that we've learned? So just to set the structure for the presentation, it's starting from the challenge that we have now with reaching net zero by 2045. So the Scottish Government set the target almost 2 years ago now. And there's been great progress. And what we can see certainly with electricity is massive decarbonisation of electricity supply in Scotland. But there are now challenges, not just in terms of decarbonising electricity, but heat and transport. And this is one of the key aspects of what we need to do next. And the projects I'm going to use to illustrate what's happening. In Fife, it's the H100 project. Aberdeen, there's the deployment of the vehicles in Aberdeen, hydrogen vehicles. But just north of Aberdeen at St Fergus, there's also the Acorn project. Then going up to Orkney, we'll look at some of the innovative projects that are happening at the local level in Orkney. And then come back down to Cromarty and start to look at what's happening with some of the ports that could actually be really important going forward. Quick advert for the association. Alf, thank you very much for mentioning the growth in our membership. Certainly in recent years, the membership has gone up very quickly, and the membership includes not just the industry, but academics. So we've got most of the universities in Scotland, local authorities, city authorities, and individuals. So the challenge we're now faced with is net zero. The issues around climate change are becoming ever more apparent, and the need for rapid action is also evident. And the target that was set back in May 2019 by the Scottish Government was that we should be net zero by 2045. So that in itself is a pretty challenging target, very challenging target. But there is actually a series of interim targets. So the next target coming up is the 2030 target, which is a 75% reduction. And that probably in many ways is the most difficult of the lot. How do we start to make the big cuts that we need to achieve to actually get to 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, bearing in mind that only 2 years ago, the target was 80% by 2050. So we're almost trying to do the same target, but 20 years earlier. And to put this in context, the European Union has also set a 2030 target, and their target is 55%. So absolutely a stretch target for Scotland. But there are reasons to be optimistic. The decarbonisation of electricity in Scotland has been progressing very rapidly. So the graph on the right that you see here shows that the share of renewable electricity, as part of gross electricity consumption in Scotland over the past 20 years. And you can see that the amount of renewables has gone up very rapidly. And in fact, just last week, there was a further update that in 2020, I think the number was 97% of Scotland's electricity over the course of last year had been produced by renewables. So, this includes, hydro, offshore wind, and onshore wind. Now, most of the growth recently has been with onshore wind, but going forward, as we'll see later, the growth is likely to be with offshore. But the challenge now is not electricity, it's actually to do with the decarbonisation of heat and transport. So electricity is about a quarter of Scotland's final energy demand. Transport is about the same amount, just over a quarter, and heat represents pretty much half of Scotland's energy demand. So if we're going to be successful in meeting the 75% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, we will absolutely need to tackle the emissions from both transport and from heat. And one of the big challenges here, of course, is that the current energy supply into both of those markets is essentially fossil fuels, liquid fossil fuels into transport, and natural gas is one of the main forms of energy used for heat. So how do we replace liquid fossil fuels and natural gas with low carbon equivalents? As well as the challenge, when you just look at the annual pie charts, there is another factor which needs to be looked at very, very carefully, and that's around the seasonal variability of the energy demand. So, the annual pie charts kind of just smooth things out. So you look at it, half of Scotland's energy demand comes from heat. But what that misses is that the scale of energy demand for heat varies throughout the year. Not surprisingly, we need more heating in winter than we do in summer. And this graph, which is taken out of the Scottish energy strategy, The Future of Energy in Scotland, which was published about 2 years ago, clearly shows the seasonal variation in heat demand. So the light green trace on the graph is the heat demand. And you can see how it goes from a low point in the summer, typically in July, to the high point in winter around about January. And there's almost a 5-fold increase in heat demand going from the summer low point to the winter high point. And even this doesn't show the full detail of when you get very cold days, the amount of instant heat demand that happens typically at 6:30 on a very cold morning when everybody's central heating switches on. So there are some real challenges in terms of how you meet the instantaneous demands and not just the annual averages. And a lot of this will need to be considered by using storage, energy storage. And this is well beyond what most battery systems would be capable of, even if they were commercially viable. So the examples I'm going to give are, we're going to be starting in Methil, in Fife, just north of Edinburgh, moving up to Aberdeen, and then heading on up to the very north of Scotland to Orkney before we come back down to Cromarty. So starting in Methil, the Hydrogen Office was a project that started just over 10 years ago. And in this picture, on the right-hand side, you can see a wind turbine on a dock side. And just to the right of the wind turbine, you can see almost like a diamond-shaped building. Well, that's the Hydrogen Office. And that was opened about 10 years ago. And just to mention that dock was actually one of many docks in Methil that was used for exporting coal. So Methil was actually one of the biggest exporters of coal in the UK. And it's ironic that now it's one of the areas where a lot of the work on developing hydrogen systems has actually been carried out. And the Hydrogen Office, over the past 10 years, has provided a lot of education and outreach to schools and colleges in Fife. About 30,000 pupils and students have been through workshop activities led by the Hydrogen Office. And that's really important because that set the foundation for a good understanding, good appreciation of hydrogen fuel cell technologies in the local area. But the Hydrogen Office has also been the base for various innovation projects. And one in particular, the Levenmouth project in 2017, built a local off-grid energy system, private wire system, essentially integrating local renewables using hydrogen as part of the storage to make sure that there was enough energy to keep the lights on when the wind wasn't blowing and the sun wasn't shining. So the input was a mixture of wind and photovoltaics. The hydrogen was produced by electrolysis. There was storage of the hydrogen, there was a fuel cell, and then you have the private wire system. So about 8 buildings in the local area were on this private wire, and it was all controlled by a software system developed by Toshiba. And that was actually starting to predict not just how much you had in the storage, but what was the weather likely to be like over the next few days. So you could start to anticipate the energy demand and the energy supply. And this was supported by the Scottish Government's Local Energy Challenge Fund. And as part of the project, there was a fleet of vehicles rolled out. Many of these were hydrogen, well, some of them were hydrogen fuel cells, some were hydrogen combustion. The refuse truck that you see here is actually one of the diesel hydrogen trucks. So this uses a mixture of diesel and hydrogen. So rather than running on pure diesel, some of the hydrogen is used to replace diesel and actually reduce the carbon dioxide emissions by about 50%. So it's part of it's not the perfect solution. You still have some diesel, but it's actually a big step along the way. And there are now developments with the same type of engines, but with a much higher level of hydrogen. So combustion and fuel cells will be 2 of the options that can be used going forward for vehicles, and also for other types of power generation. But the next stage in the activities in Methil, this is a really important project, and it's being led by SGN, the gas distribution network company for Scotland. And this is a project to prove the practicality of converting households from running on natural gas for heating to running on 100% green hydrogen for heat. And the picture on the left that you see, again, it shows Methil, and right at the top left of the picture, you might just be able to make out the small wind turbine, and that's the wind turbine at the hydrogen office. So that is the dock side from the hydrogen office location. The much bigger wind turbine on the right-hand side is an offshore wind turbine design, about 100 meters off the shore. And this will provide the energy to actually produce the green hydrogen, so by electrolysis. And that hydrogen will then be used for up to 300 households in the local area, so that the houses that you see just the lower left of the picture will be given the choice. Would you like to stay on natural gas, or would you like to make the change to green hydrogen? So the electricity from the offshore wind goes to the electrolyzer. The electrical current splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen is then taken forward to the hydrogen storage. And the storage is actually a really important part of this project, because when the wind isn't blowing, the electrolyzer won't be running, but you will probably still have the demand for heat. So there'll be several tons of hydrogen actually stored on the site in steel tanks, and that will provide the buffer capacity, so that if the wind isn't blowing for a few days, you've still got enough hydrogen to keep everybody nice and warm. And the objectives of this project are to prove the safety, the technical performance of the hydrogen for heat. It allows households, as I say, to make a choice whether they want to stay with natural gas or to go for green hydrogen, and actually show on a local level, can you match the supply from the wind turbine to the demand from the housing if you have a suitable system with a suitable amount of hydrogen storage. And once it's all running, then the households in Fife will be some of the very first in Europe, at that scale in Europe, to be running on green hydrogen. And this will be not just a standalone project, but there's a number of other projects being developed in the Fife area as part of the hydrogen coast activities, and some of these link into industry, some of these potentially link into storage. So when we start to really scale up the use of hydrogen, the use of steel tanks may not be the most appropriate way of storing enough hydrogen for thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of households. So we need to start to look to other ways of storing the hydrogen, and the use of old gas fields, porous rock structures for gas storage is well established. It's been done for many years off the east coast of England. And the question is, can the same approach be used for the storage of hydrogen? And this is some of the work that's already ongoing, for example, with projects such as High Store Port. And just up the coast from Fife at Bowness, another project that's underway, nothing to do with heat. This is about transport. And this is a project to convert some electric trains to actually hydrogen fuel cell electric trains. And the plan is that the train will be ready and running for COP26. So at Bowness, 1st to 12th of November, this train should be running using hydrogen. And we'll come back to the transport activities later on, but decarbonisation of heavy transport is one of the areas that hydrogen is seen as being particularly useful for. So, talking about transport, Aberdeen, and many of the activities in Aberdeen have been based on some of the work that started again almost 10 years ago, and this was with the development and deployment of the Aberdeen buses, the hydrogen buses, and this deployed in March 2015 with 10 buses. So in the picture on the left here, you can see 2 of the buses, along with some of the other vehicles in the Aberdeen fleet. And these buses, since they went into service in March 2015, they've carried 2 million passengers. They've done over 1 million kilometers of travel, very reliable. And one of the key successes has been the reliability of the hydrogen refueling. And that started to really help Aberdeen develop plans in terms of where it goes next, developing their hydrogen bus fleet. The refueler, just a couple of words about the refueler. So this is a Kitty Brewster, just north of the city centre. And this was built as part of the European funded project with the buses. And it's now, we believe, the most intensively used hydrogen refueling station in Europe. So over the past 5 to 6 years, it's dispensed over 200 tons of hydrogen, so about 35 tons of hydrogen per year, and very reliably. And this is important because the refueling station was the hydrogen refueling station for the buses in Aberdeen. If this didn't work, then the buses wouldn't be able to refuel and we wouldn't be able to run them. So a lot of work was done to make sure that this would be reliable. And they've achieved that. The reliability has been absolutely fantastic. But the design was very careful. So there is built-in redundancy in most of the plants. So there's actually 3 electrolyzers, 2 compressors, and I think there was just one refueling pump. But the work achieved its objective of the reliability. And that set the foundation for where they're going next. There are already 15 of the double-decker hydrogen fuel cell buses arrived in Aberdeen and starting to be deployed. And there's another 10 due to arrive. So there'll be 25 hydrogen fuel cell double-decker buses being used in Aberdeen by the middle of next year. But it's not just the buses. So other vehicles in the fleet include the refuse collection truck, which you see on the left here. Same design, same type as the one I showed you earlier from Methil. There are street sweepers. Again, this is running on hydrogen diesel, and the fuel cell buses, of course. Now, the advantage of the fuel cell technology is that, unlike the combustion engines, there is absolutely no NOx or particulate matter from fuel cells. Fuel cells work in a very different way. It's a catalytic conversion of the energy in the fuel to make electricity rather than a high temperature combustion. And in using the fuel cells, you avoid the NOx formation and the particulates that you get from combustion. But also in Aberdeen, there are a number of the Toyota Mirai fuel cell cars. Some of these are used by the NHS, there's one used by SEPA, and there's some used by Grampian Police. But the one that I'd like to point out is, if you've got a driving license, you can actually book this one up and take it out. It's a fantastic car to drive, a bit large for my liking, but very smooth, very comfortable, and a pleasure to drive. And this is quite important, because going forward, the question is, do we need to replace every single petrol and diesel car by a fuel cell car? Well, possibly not. We've seen a big change in the way people use travel. A lot of people aren't traveling to work in the same way. So do we all need a car, or can we just make use of car clubs, on a as needs basis? But it's not just about transport. So also in Aberdeen, there's work on the at the P&J Live, installed the what we think is actually the largest fuel cell combined heat and power system in Europe, 3 of the Doosan Pure Cell units. So that's providing clean power, clean heat to the P&J Live. And just down from just south of the Aberdeen city centre, the new harbour that's being built, the new South Harbour, this will be an important hub for support of the offshore wind farms. And it also has the potential to, around it, build a local infrastructure for hydrogen production, hydrogen use, and hydrogen innovation in Aberdeen, part of the energy transition zone that's been created in Aberdeen. And going forward, when we start to see the growth and deployment of offshore wind, hopefully the support vessels that take maintenance crews out to the wind farms will be hydrogen. And there are actually designs being developed. Products will be on the market very shortly, which replace the traditional diesel support vessels for offshore activities with hydrogen versions. And this is one example, the CMB Hydrocat. And you can see that essentially it's replacing the use of diesel engines by the use of hydrogen. And this is not a small exercise. The engines are substantial engines, 1,000 horsepower each, and the amount of hydrogen that you need to actually propel them, 170 kilos a day. Again, that's not trivial. But the design is being carried out, and the actual product should be on the market very shortly. And this is part of the wider activities in Aberdeen with the energy transition zone. So we're looking at decarbonisation of heat. Can our pipeline be brought down from St Fergus to Aberdeen, bringing hydrogen from St Fergus? And I'll mention the details in a minute. Potentially the use of transport. So can hydrogen trains be part of the local transport infrastructure for Aberdeen? And indeed, can hydrogen trucks also start to play a large part in decarbonising logistics in the Aberdeen area? And we think that all of these are indeed possible. But the question might be, where does all the hydrogen come from? And this is where there's often a discussion around, can we build up the green hydrogen, so the hydrogen produced from renewables, quickly enough? Or do we need to use some of the hydrogen produced by conversion of natural gas, but using carbon capture and storage to make sure that hydrogen has a very low carbon footprint? And one of the projects that is actually well developed is at St Fergus. It's led by a company called Pale Blue Dot. It's about installing a steam methane reformer that converts natural gas to hydrogen at St Fergus, and then capturing the CO2 and taking the CO2 out offshore to storage sites, typically depleted gas fields, where the CO2 can be stored safely in the porous rock structures deep underground. So this is developing. This is an active project. If it goes ahead, it should be operational by the mid-2020s. And that would then become part of a much wider network of hydrogen production and hydrogen infrastructure. But potentially the hydrogen infrastructure could start to bring together both the green and the blue hydrogen. In particular, some of the offshore pipelines, the oil and gas pipelines that exist, which are no longer needed, might be able to be repurposed for the use of hydrogen or for CO2 movement out to the sequestration sites. So there's a lot of work going on to try and understand, as part of the energy transition, what infrastructure could actually be usefully repurposed from oil and gas duty to low carbon renewables and carbon capture and storage duties. And it's not just a question of the infrastructure in Scotland. It's also a question of how some of this infrastructure might join into much wider markets. And we'll come back to this later, but the the opportunity for Scotland is to really increase the amount of production of hydrogen, but also to see if the hydrogen can actually be not just enough for the use of, of Scotland's heat and transport demands, but also start to export some of that hydrogen to other markets. So in the same way as we've exported oil and gas for many years from the North Sea, can we start to overproduce the amount of green hydrogen from renewables and start to export green hydrogen into other markets? And in particular, markets in Central Europe are really looking carefully at how they might be able to meet their industrial demands for low carbon hydrogen and ideally green hydrogen. So there could be a very good fit here between the supply of green hydrogen from Scotland and the demand for green hydrogen in Central Europe. So now going up to the north of Scotland and looking at things on a different scale, looking at things on a distributed generation level. Orkney has been fantastically successful in increasing the amount of renewables. Since 2014, they've been producing more renewable electricity than they've needed, so substantially ahead of the rest of Scotland in actually decarbonising their power network. And that's been a great achievement, but it's also brought some challenges in that in many cases the wind turbines have found that the grid connections have not been either robust enough, or the demand for the electricity locally has not been enough to actually match the supply. And often you end up with wind turbines being turned off. And that's a waste of energy. People talk about efficiency, but we also need to think about efficiency in terms of how we can use all of the available resources, as well as how we move those resources from the point of production to the point of use. But the challenge, the way to overcome the challenge in Orkney was starting to look at the use of electrolyzers located close to the site of production. And the first one was installed on the island of Edy. You see this at the very north of the picture. And this was next to the European Marine Energy Centre's tidal turbine test facility. There's some very, very fast flowing currents out there. Orkney is kind of between the North Sea and the Atlantic. And every time there's a tide, you get a lot of flow going past. So, very useful place to be. Turning the surplus electricity into hydrogen allows them to make more use of the electricity, but they then had to think about who's going to use the hydrogen. And Edy is about 120 people, so there's a limit to the demand on Edy. And the solution is to actually move the hydrogen on ferry, put the hydrogen in tube trailers, and you'll see one of those in a minute, and move it by ferry down to Kirkwall, where it could be used for heat, for transport, for power. So very much finding ways of actually moving the energy from where you make it to where you need it. And using a tube trailer gives you the storage as well, which gives you the flexibility in terms of timing. So this is the facility on Edy. It's right on the coast. You can see just in the compound on the left, you can see various green containers. Those containers are where the electrolyzer is based. And just to the left of the containers, you might just be able to make out one of the tube trailers parked up. And it's these tube trailers that move the hydrogen from Edy down to Kirkwall. So we're now in Kirkwall, and this is the harbour. You can see the ferry, which this is actually the Shappensea ferry, not the Edy ferry, in the harbour. Just at the front, you can see one of the tube trailers all ready to go. And on the left-hand side, in the compound, you can see a second tube trailer. And the blue box is a fuel cell, which is used to provide power for ships when they're in the dock. And also the heat from the fuel cell is used for background heating for the building. So this is very much about making as much use of that energy as possible. And also in Kirkwall, there's the hydrogen refueler, which is used for refueling the vans. So these vans, and there are 5 of them, these are fuel cell range extended vans. So they're battery vans. They've got a fuel cell, and the fuel cell essentially gives you the ability to charge up the battery all of the time the vehicle is being used, and essentially doubles the range. So as well as having the energy stored in the battery, you've got the energy stored in the hydrogen tank. And this approach, the hybrid approach, is also starting to be used with pretty much all of the commercial vehicles and buses. So the buses that are now coming into Aberdeen, for example, they use a 30 kilowatt fuel cell with the hydrogen storage of about 20 kilos, and that provides enough energy overall to keep you running for the 15-18 hours of a typical bus operating day, but together with a battery that provides some of the grunt, in terms of going up hills and moving away quickly from a stop. And it's not just about the work with road vehicles. Orkney has also been looking at some of the work to decarbonise marine, and particularly the ferries. The ferries in Orkney use a lot of fuel. One of the biggest contributors to Orkney's carbon footprint is the emissions from running the ferries on a regular basis. So the ferry that you see on the right, that's actually already had a conversion to install hydrogen to run the auxiliary engine. So this isn't the main propulsion, this is auxiliary engine, as a diesel hydrogen flex fuel engine. And the ferry on the left, this is actually a fuel cell electric ferry, but there is an identical design being developed for the High Seas 3 project, which will be a hydrogen fuel cell ferry. And that will allow the ferry, and the plan is it will be run between Chappensea and Kirkwall to be a true zero emission ferry running on hydrogen. And going into the third dimension, aviation. This picture isn't actually in Orkney, it's actually taken down at Cranfield, but the refueler is actually from EMEC. It's the EMEC high flyer refueler. The plan was for the plane to come up to Orkney last year for trials, but due to COVID restrictions, it didn't happen. And the plane, it's a single engine 6-seater plane called High Flyer 1. And the plan is there will be a High Flyer 2, which has 2 engines, and it's a 19-seater. So scaling up the planes. And the plan is that planes such as these could be used in commercial local flights, hopefully in the not too distant future. And as part of this, the centre in Kirkwall, the airport in Kirkwall, is becoming a hub for sustainable aviation. And it already has on site a backup hydrogen gensets that can actually provide electricity to the airport in the case that there's any problems with the local power networks. So where does it all go next? And certainly in Orkney, they're not short of ideas. Orkney Distillery has already done some trials to see if they could convert their distilling to hydrogen. That was the High Spirits 1 project, and they're now going forward with High Spirits 2. And I don't think it'll be very long before they actually start producing gin in Orkney with hydrogen as the fuel. And also in Orkney, quite recently, the planning went through for a green hydrogen to green ammonia project based on an existing wind farm, which will be extended. And the reason for going for the ammonia is to actually convert the hydrogen into something that is storable, transportable, and potentially could be used locally. So the tractor runs on hydrogen, but if you have ammonia, the potential is for that ammonia could be used in agriculture. Ammonia can be used as a fertilizer, and this is an example. This is all diesel, unfortunately, but where you can actually use the ammonia to actually provide the fertilizer for the soil for growing crops. And moving down the coast to Cromarty, just to wrap up, scaling up the production of green hydrogen, scaling up the demand. This is the next stage to go, and it's very much based on the offshore wind. So Cromarty, just off Cromarty, there are several of the wind farm sites, some which have been built, some which are currently being built. So it's in a very good location to actually bring the electricity back to the beach at Cromarty and to convert some of that into hydrogen. And this is absolutely the plan. So having the electrolyzers based on shore, bringing the electricity into Cromarty, but then also looking to build up the local demand. And it could be a mixture of transport, but also industry demand. And the local distilleries in particular are very interested in how they might be able to use hydrogen, green hydrogen, for decarbonising their manufacturing process. Also linking into transport, so potentially could start to supply into Inverness, the buses. Trains could also be a possibility. So very much ports and harbours could become some of the hubs for green hydrogen activity going forward. And the opportunity is that if we can really scale up the production of green hydrogen from offshore, if we can bring the cost down from access to low-cost, reliable offshore wind, then the opportunity is to actually export that green hydrogen into either UK markets or international markets. I mentioned earlier Central Europe as being a potential. So this is absolutely at the heart of the Scottish Government's hydrogen policy statement, which came out in December last year, along with the target that by 2030, Scotland would be producing 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen per year. So very much an ambitious target, very much a question of scaling up, very much a question of how do we learn from the early projects to make sure that when we do this, it's going to be reliable, safe, and commercially attractive. And going forward, cities will be obviously a key demand for clean hydrogen. Some of the ideas are already coming forward with companies like Arup developing concepts for low carbon cities. And Glasgow is very much starting to look at this in more detail, with Scottish Power starting to develop a hydrogen production project at Whiteley's wind farm just south of Glasgow. Glasgow Council starting to set targets for becoming net zero by 2030, absolutely sets the opportunity to move forward and move forward quickly. So just to wrap up, COP26 is coming up, and some of the activities that we're looking at is about how do we start to make the most of COP26, either in Glasgow or at other events. So we're looking at some of the opportunities to run events and activities during the first 2 weeks in November. Hopefully, what the presentation has given you is a good insight of the projects that are happening in Scotland, what's been developed, where we are going, and the scale that we need to get to if we're going to be successful in reaching not just the net zero by 2045, but to actually reach some of the stage points along the way, 75% reduction by 2030. So next year, COP26 in Glasgow, hopefully that will be an opportunity, Alf, for you and your students to take an active part. And I'm very happy now to take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Nigel, for this fantastic presentation with a lot of examples and showing the work going forward. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in touch with Tavis and obviously the rest of our colleagues to see how we can get into this event, which is obviously it's going to be the world center for some days. So I've got quite a few questions here, and I think that you can probably see them as well in the Q&A, Nigel. So Binay from the OGTC is here with us today as well. He's asking about is Scotland playing catch up with imported hydrogen technologies and missing out on developing a domestic supply chain? So perhaps it's a sort of balance here between import and export. If you have any comments on this, Nigel?
So it is true to say that Scotland doesn't have an incumbent electrolyser manufacturer, but I think the opportunity for Scotland isn't just in building the equipment. It's about in understanding how to actually apply the technologies, how to integrate the technologies, and how to make it work. And again, I think it's fair to say that countries like Germany have got a much bigger manufacturing base than Scotland has, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon. But countries, Germany is looking very closely at some of the activities that are happening in Scotland, and with projects such as BIGHIT, they've achieved international recognition for what's been done in Orkney. So the question is, do we need to focus on just building the electrolyzers, or should we focus on the expertise that goes around how we use those electrolyzers? And it's not just a question of the actual design and operation, often it's the question of how you make sure that when you develop a project, the actual overall project is done in a way that it will be safe to operate. So there's much more than just the electrolyzer. The electrolyzers, yes, it's at the heart of some of the technologies, but it is just one component in the whole system. And if any of the parts of that system don't work properly, then it will fail. So the quick answer is, it's not just about the equipment, it's about how you put the equipment together.
Thanks. Yep, I totally agree. I think anyway, there's we can see calls and more calls about technology development as well on this sort of technology. So I think it's a good opportunity for universities, for example, to get engaged in this sort of let's say fundamental / applied research to develop that workforce and also obviously this, let's say, new equipment as well. So I've got a question about someone who's anonymous here, saying the H100 LED project would be transformational. Is there infrastructure currently present for the transportation network to the individual homes? I think we're talking about 5 here. And what is the viability for high-rise housing? So I suppose if it expands, then.
So to be clear, H100 is a demonstration project, and what is unique about H100 is that they will be laying an additional local gas network in the streets for the trial area. So the street will have both natural gas pipes and hydrogen pipes running side by side. So the existing gas network together with the new hydrogen network. And that allows them to say to every household that has both pipes going down the street, you have a choice between using natural gas, stay with the natural gas, or using green hydrogen. So, that's the H100 trial. When it comes to the much larger rollout, they will not be running 2 sets of pipes down every street. The plan is that if the H100 trial is successful, then ultimately we will see a conversion of the UK gas distribution network from being a natural gas network to a 100% hydrogen network. In the same way as back in the 1960s, early 70s, the UK converted from Towns gas to natural gas, we would see a conversion from natural gas to 100% hydrogen. Now, along the way, there may be some use of blends, so adding in 10 or 15% hydrogen into the natural gas. That doesn't need any change to the existing gas network or the existing appliances. When you change to 100% hydrogen, you have to change the appliance. But again, the approach that is being developed here is very interesting. It's a bit like the digital-ready televisions. The idea is that in a few years' time, the boilers that are being sold will be sold as hydrogen-ready boilers. And that means that when it comes to doing a conversion, it would be a small box inside the boiler would be swapped out and not the whole boiler. So this is about starting to think about the steps that would make the conversion from natural gas to 100% hydrogen a practical proposition for the UK.
Thanks, Nigel. There's a question from Paul Weisman. He wants to know how is hydrogen stored in that project in H100, if it is stored, and what is the volume used, and if there are any restrictions in terms of storing large amounts of hydrogen in residential areas.
So the plan is the hydrogen will be stored in large steel cylinders. So in the same way as we stored the hydrogen at the hydrogen office in large steel cylinders for the Levenmouth project. But the ones for the H100 project will be bigger, because 300 houses, you need a fair chunk of hydrogen, to provide that level of supply. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's in the ton quantity that they'll be needing for that project. And in terms of limits, there are not limits as such, but there are thresholds that you need to be aware of for planning and for storage of hydrogen, as true for many other substances. And this is all part of the H100 project to make sure that the design and the delivery is done in a safe manner.
I think safety is definitely one of the great outlooks here, and related to that, Abiodun has a question on the safety provision for cars, for example, in some of the projects we've seen in Aberdeen, etc.
Yes. So the hydrogen fuel cell cars that are on the market now, so the first mass hydrogen fuel cell car that came to the market was the Hyundai iX35 was the first one that came through, then the Toyota Mirai. And the iX35, I think, came onto the market in about 2013, 2014. The Mirai came in 2015. And there were questions being asked, when these came to the market. But I think it's important to realise that car manufacturers will not put product out if it's not safe. And the Mirais, the Toyota Mirais, they actually have had these in use in Paris as taxis for the past sort of 3 or 4 years. There's a fleet of taxis. I think it's about 100 taxis due to be increased to 500 soon in Paris. And if you've ever seen the driving in Paris, and I hope nobody on this call is going to take offence at this, but there've been quite a few of them that've been damaged. Some of them very severely damaged, and there's never been any issues with the hydrogen tank. And just as a little sort of comment, the Metropolitan Police in London, they also use the Mirais, and to actually get the Mirai accepted by the Met Police, basically you have to give the Met Police 2 cars, and they tell you probably won't get these back, and they take them through some of the toughest testing, and I don't know what they do, but they are pretty much wrecked by the time they get back. And the Mirai passed, that one. The Met Police have got different categories, and it doesn't get in the very top category because the top speed of the Mirai is 120. So I don't know what you need to do to be in the sort of pursuit car category, but the Met Police cars also get used very, very hard. So all I would say is that the evidence that we have from the actual deployment of the hydrogen fuel cell cars is that leaks don't seem to be a problem, and in the case of accidents, that there's never been a problem with the integrity of the hydrogen tank. These tanks are tested very, very thoroughly. It's not to say that there couldn't be a situation. It's impossible to be 100% certain, but the evidence is that they are very safe.
Thanks. Yeah, a proof of concept in tough conditions. There's a question, Nigel, here about ammonia. Whether I guess ammonia is also part of this cycle when you could store hydrogen in let's say less volatile form. I don't know if you want to mention something about the possibilities of transporting or using ammonia as an energy vector.
Absolutely, and that is part of the plan for some of the biggest projects on the planet. So the NEOM project in Saudi is planning to make ammonia from green hydrogen from renewables, and that ammonia will then be transported to markets like Japan, where it'll be converted back into hydrogen and then used to fuel vehicles. So ammonia is actually seen as being one of the ways of moving hydrogen over long distances on a cost-effective way. And that is absolutely true when you're traveling 3,000-4,000 plus miles. When you're moving distances of up to 1,000 miles, then pipelines could still be some of the most cost-effective ways of moving. So going forward, I would see a mixture of ammonia and pipelines being, and it depends very much on the scale and the type of demand that you'll have at the other end.
Yep. But I think it's all about diversity as well, and having different sources in different places. Another question, I mean, we're just running out of time, so just maybe a couple of more questions, and then we'll have probably to say goodbye. Not to mention that this has been recorded, so you can check on this later on as well. I think one interesting question here is, when do you think hydrogen Well, first there's a question about what are the real challenges for hydrogen to get, to actually for us to get a hydrogen economy installed in globally. That would be one question, for example. So what are the main challenges at the moment and that we face it locally, but also at a global level?
So the main challenge, Alf, is to make a hydrogen economy happen. We need basically three things. We need the hydrogen supply at the right scale. We need the infrastructure that actually allows us to move the hydrogen from where you make it to where you want to use it. And we need the hydrogen demand, supply, infrastructure, and demand. If we have any one of those ingredients missing, then the hydrogen economy does not work well. So in particular, when people are starting to look at scaling up hydrogen projects, and there's lots of big projects out there, gigawatt scale projects. If you're doing a gigawatt scale hydrogen project, you need gigawatt scale hydrogen demand. So then the challenge is how we build up the demand. And this is something that absolutely needs to be looked at very closely. And it's not going to be just transport. I think heating, especially industrial heat, could be one of the early demands, especially with sectors such as the whiskey sector. Why? Because they are looking to become net zero by 2040, in some cases 2030. So the hydrogen economy is driven essentially by targets for net zero. If we can actually identify the sectors, the organizations that are moving towards net zero quickly and work with them, I think we stand a good chance, the best chance of actually making the hydrogen economy happen.
And the very last question before we go, Nigel, about cost. There's been a few questions about cost. What do you think? It's a quite straightforward, and everyone is probably wondering the same. When do you think that hydrogen cost will be competitive, probably against natural gas or other possibilities we have there for electrification, etc.?
Natural gas is tough. It's a very competitively priced energy source, but natural gas has greenhouse gas emissions. So I think the question around pricing has to be not just what the current price of natural gas is, but what is the overall essential price of natural gas once you start to factor in the CO2 emission. In the same way as when we start to look at conversion of heat from natural gas to electric, it looks very unattractive at the moment. But we're not comparing apples with apples. We're comparing a high carbon fuel with essentially a zero carbon fuel. So going forward, I think the real comparison or the real question to ask is what is the least cost option to achieve the net zero result? So is this going to be with large scale electrification, large scale use of hydrogen, carbon capture storage, or, and I think this is the most likely scenario, is a mixture of all of these, because each one of these has particular strengths. And I think just to try and find a single answer, the perfect solution is probably very, very misleading. And I think although it's more complex, we need to look at how all of these technologies work together. And in particular, hydrogen and electricity can be very complementary when it comes to moving energy over long distances, storing energy. Storage, something we haven't really touched on in this lecture, but it's absolutely critical if we're going to achieve that outcome for net zero for an economy.
Thanks, Nigel. Absolutely agree. So we don't have, unfortunately, time for more. Nigel, it's been a great pleasure to host you as always, and I'm pretty sure we'll be in touch shortly because there are a lot of things going on in Aberdeen, as you know, and at the School of Engineering and the overall university, with probably a hydrogen lab being installed soon, and a lot of initiatives. And in part, obviously, this is thanks for this push that the region has on net zero, but particularly on hydrogen. So thank you very much, Nigel, for being here today. If there are any other questions, perhaps I'll send you an email with some of the remaining things that have been there in the list, but thanks for answering the questions and this very, very illustrative presentation as usual.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity. Delighted.
Okay, so I'll just say thank you as well for everyone who came here today, especially the students and obviously Travis from the CT, and Brian and Bruce for being there behind the cameras and setting everything up. It's been a real pleasure to be here with everyone today. Hope you found it interesting. And as Brian has mentioned, the recording will be available soon in the website of the CET. So please be our guest to visit us. And any questions you may have, any further clarifications, you probably can reach us somehow. So I'm sure we'll be in touch. And the way that I can see hydrogen economy is going on, I'm pretty sure we're going to meet again very soon, because I think this is an unstoppable snowball, right? And we all want to be part of it somehow or another. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you, Alf.